Welcome to the Operator's Table. I'm Cris Morgado, your host. Today I'm with Ralph Mandarino, founder of Necromantic Brew Co, a fully gluten-free craft brewery and horror-themed taproom. It's beer for people who normally cannot drink beer, inside a space that feels like a cult horror screening room. Ralph, thanks for being here. Where are you calling from today?
Thank you. I'm calling from Long Island, Huntington, New York.
The plan for today, I'm going to cover a little bit your origin story, what's working right now in the business, any main friction points, where do you want to be in the next 12 months. Then we have a very quick, fun lightning round at the end. This usually takes about 35 minutes. If you're having fun, it can last up to 60 minutes. So we'll take it easy and see how it goes. Before we start, I like to kind of get a finger on the pulse of the individual that started an operation. For you as an entrepreneur, when did this stop being a hobby and you thought, this is it, I'm going all in?
Ironically, immediately. So before even to making one batch of beer, my friend who had kind of, really pushed to do this as a hobby. We were spending some time together. I'm a dad. At the time, I had two young children. They were about 6 and 8 approximately. I was doing all sorts of stuff for them. I was very involved coaching baseball, softball, taking them to their other events, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, everything that they had going on, including, I was the stay-at-home parent basically. So, all the cooking and the shopping and all the fun stuff that goes along with that was interesting because traditionally that's not our role, right? As men, like we're more hunters and gatherers rather than the stay-at-home type. So I had been home at this point, I would say, for about 15 years, and it was killing me because there were other things that I did keep my time, like I said, getting involved in the kids stuff. We wound up starting an actual baseball and softball league in my town. So I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I had some smaller businesses that I ran out of my basement, but when I knew what the landscape was locally for craft beer, and I did a little research, gluten-free beer really didn't exist, especially on our coast here from Maine to Miami. At that time, there was zero. So there was one in Jersey City that did like a half and half kind of deal. So they had two separate systems, a partition, they kept ingredients separate and everything else. And so that was the extent of it. And then if you wanted to go further east, I don't know how everyone's geography is, but Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I consider that pretty much the Midwest at that point because you're only a couple of miles removed from Ohio. And that was the closest East Coast brewery that was around at that point. Most of the gluten-free stuff comes from the West Coast, Colorado, really never made its way east until we started doing what we were doing. And then a few other people it started to catch on with. So basically in 2018, that's when I started brewing. And so when we started brewing in 2018, we were in the store, in the shop with all the supplies when you have buckets and ingredients and metal copper coils for chillers, and you have all this stuff that you're bringing to the register. And I kind of nudged my buddy and I was like, yo, we're gonna own a brewery. And he was like, get the freak, he was like, come on, man. He's like, let's brew a batch of beer before we start planning the next 20 years of our lives or whatever. And I get it. I got it. I did. But for me, I've always had this thing where if I'm really going to invest serious time, and it is an expensive hobby, and I can only assume it's only gotten more expensive over the course of time, I wanted to make sure there was something on the back end of it. And, again, having kids and a house and responsibility, car payments, whatever it is, we all have bills to pay. I wanted to make sure that if I'm investing this money, even let it be a hobby, that there was some sort of possibility of a back end. And so that was the beginning of it all. And then, of course, we had to learn how to brew. So, it honestly didn't take much further than that because they have these all-in-one kits where they almost make it pretty idiot-proof, I'll be honest. So we did the step-by-step process, followed the recipe, made a beer, and after that first pale ale, I said, the hell with this, I can make my own recipes. I like to cook. So for me, finding ingredients that taste good or go well together, that is like heaven to me because I love to make so many different dishes. So once I knew the procedure, the proper way to handle the ingredients, certain ingredients have to be added at certain times and, that type of thing, I was just kind of like, all right, well, set me loose. So then we we started making our own recipes from there, and then it turned into something special.
You remind me, your friend name became then your co-partner, co-founder?
Initially, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So he and I, we started the business together, but it's, it's a demanding job. I mean, all businesses are demanding. This you have to couple in the physical expectations in addition to the day-to-day running of a business. He was an engineer, so I don't want to say he wasn't cut out for it, but it just, you have good friends and they just don't make good business partners. So, I love him to death. He's a great dude. Still is a great dude. But, yeah, it just didn't work out. So he wound up exiting the business probably within the first year and a half.
I see. But he was basically the person that eventually pushed you to.
Well, I mean, I was kind of the one pushing him. He wanted me to do the gluten-free beer because, like I said, I like to cook. So I remember it was a pivotal night where, after a long day of coaching was like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it's a long day when you're coaching 3 teams. And then you're driving all across Long Island, which may not look too big, but, when you're trying to get to a certain place at a certain time with all the traffic, it's a nightmare. So I had him over for dinner after a long day, and I made either shrimp scampi or linguine and white clam sauce. It was one of those dishes. And when he had it, he was like, "Oh man," he goes, "Aren't you going to get sick from all this?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, it's delicious." He's like, "Isn't the gluten in this thing going to destroy your stomach?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but no, because I made it gluten-free." And that's when he kind of got this, "You made this gluten-free?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "There's no gluten. None of this is like wheat based." I was like, "No." He's like, "Not even the pasta?" I said, "No." So he says, "Yo, we really got to make beer," because I think at that point he realized we could do something fun. But again, for us, it was more, we would hang out Saturday night, blow off steam. He would bring a 4-pack of his favorite beer. But again, because I didn't have much to choose from and the options on the market were terrible because I have celiac. So it was one of those things where I was drinking tequila neat or whatever it was that I was having at that moment. And so I'd have like a glass and a half and I'm passed out on the couch while we're watching a movie, like an old married couple. And this guy's sitting there and he's fine drinking 4% beer. And he was just kind of, nudging me like, "Come on, man, wake up." So he kind of always wanted to get me back into beer because I used to enjoy beer when I could drink it. But once I stopped, it was very difficult.
I see. That's very interesting. So you did your first batch, first you drank with your friends. Do you remember the first time someone paid for your beer?
Yeah. Yeah. I do actually. Yeah. So ironically, we had made it and we were bringing it to bars just to get, owner feedback and bartender feedback, people who are in the industry, people who know. And then so when you're going to breweries, they call them beer tenders. So we were going to other breweries, sharing it with other people there and people beer tending there. And then finally we had gone to, we joined a local homebrew club, which is actually quite massive. Like it's so big that it's split into 3 homebrew clubs because the island is so big. So anyways, I'll never forget, the Christmas party there that we had, brought a 6-pack to share. It didn't last long. And what was cool was we had saved different beers, different recipes. So it was a mixed 6-pack. So everybody got to try something. It was either the pale ale or a saison or, the brown, which, we were trying to get to a stout, but the grain that we had available at the time made it almost impossible to make it into a stout. So we called it a stout, but it was really, more closer to a brown or really a porter, I guess. And so, that, and then we had a Christmas beer that we did, and then we had saved something from the summer. So yeah, it was a good mix of beer and people were coming over, we didn't tell them it was gluten-free. That was kind of cool. And then that's when one of the guys that worked at the place where the party was being held was kind of like, "Listen, I have this best friend that's gluten-free. She's so depressed she can't have beer anymore. I think it would be so cool if I can give her some of your beer. Would you mind giving me some of the beer?" And I was like, "Yeah, no doubt, no problem. We'll give you whatever you want." And then he paid us for it. And I was like, "Listen, I'm not gonna charge you." You know what I mean? Like here we are giving it away. We're just happy to get some response and some reviews and some feedback. So that was really what we were going for. But lo and behold, he wound up paying us for the beer. And I was just, like in my head, I was like, this is what I'm talking about. Like this
Yeah.
is, because it doesn't exist, the scarcity, you go to these events, that Christmas event that I'm referencing when we were handing out all that beer, like, how many people brought beer? And I'm going to tell you, because I'm not that way with the making of it. Like, I don't think my beer is the best beer ever. If you talk to some brewers, that's what it is, that theirs is the best, and here's why it's the best. No, the people that were there probably had better beer, but it was the fact that you can't get what we offer. And we were using grains that nobody else would touch. And if they would touch, maybe they'll use like one grain or one of the 6 grains that we do use, rather than saying, oh, let's use all these grains. So there was respect because people were like, how did you get that to taste like this? And I was like, well, that's part of the magic of what we do.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are you okay to share the grains you
Oh,
use?
yeah, absolutely. So what we use is we use flaked quinoa, we use roasted rice, buckwheat, millet, and blue organic corn in some instances.
And that makes the variety of the offers you present to the public at the moment.
Yeah, there's some denomination of those grains in almost everything that we do.
That's
It's,
cool.
it's great. Like I said, it's fun to play around with it. I mean, even we're 3 years in, we just celebrated our 3rd year anniversary this past weekend. Our actual day is today. So
Wow.
10/28, this is when we opened 3 years ago, and we were stuck with COVID in 2020, so it took us almost, over 2.5 years to get open.
Yeah.
So, but once we finally did, it's been great.
Yeah, because I think I read somewhere that you got the lease just before COVID, and then COVID hit, and then you guys were
Yeah,
in.
and when you say just before, so we were negotiating this lease since January, and now I was getting frustrated because I've never been in a commercial lease. I've never bought commercial property. I'm a homeowner. I've had other houses and such, so I thought the transaction, the way that the real estate was handled, was very similar. You know what I mean? So like I just wanted bare bones stuff. You could laugh at what I was asking, my big demands that slowed this down for 2 months. I wanted hot water. That was a stopper, non-negotiable. There was no hot water heater. That was my responsibility somehow. So then after I heard that, I was like, well, now I'm just going to pick at everything. So I'm like, well, I'm turning this space, which was a retail space, into a public assembly space. So what that means here is basically if I want to have 50 or more people, from 50 to 100 people in there, I need 2 bathrooms. There was 1 bathroom. So now I told them, well, now I want a second bathroom too. Like we could have avoided all this if you just would have given me hot water. But now that you don't want to give me hot water, now I'm just going to nitpick everything. So I started going crazy on these demands, and their lawyer was very curt and abrupt and whatever. But thankfully, my lawyer was a legitimate bulldog. And so we got everything we asked for, which included 28 weeks of abated rent. And I could walk away at any time to break the lease if we were not approved by New York State or the federal government for our brewer's license. Because, what good is a space if I have no license to do what I want to do? So.
Yeah, for sure.
So we were golden, but we literally signed the lease on Friday. I believe it was March 20th. And then Sunday came all the news, the heavy news that they were indeed going to close for, 2 weeks to slow the curve or whatever that nonsense they were selling. And then, yeah, it took that long to, just get people in. I mean, I had to change the zoning. That was a challenge. We had to meet with the local municipality, the village that we were with. And by the way, I always say this in every interview. Our village over there, great. You know what I mean? Like anything I needed, whenever I needed it, they did their best to facilitate respectfully to everyone else. Not like I needed something and they shot me to the top of the list. You know what I mean? But they made it a priority, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like they just made sure that we were addressed. It didn't get swept, under the rug or forgotten about. So, we did a virtual Zoom meeting, I think that November or December. And that was the first major hurdle because if we couldn't get the zoning changed, the whole thing was shot.
That was like timing. I guess they say sometimes through tribulations, through strength arises. And I guess that was probably the best time for you to open, because if you opened then and you succeeded, then you knew you were something that was definitely
That's
validated.
That's how I felt. I said, if we could survive COVID, I was like, just get me open. I would always, whisper and scream and, through all the frustrations and delays. I was just like, just get me open. If I fail, if this business fails, I want to know that I failed here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? With my hands, that I did what I thought was right and it didn't work out. It was my bad, my, poor decisions. But to get taken out before I did anything at all, and we had invested 325,000, and then we were told, oh, it's another 325,000 because the cost of goods, for materials had gone up exponentially here. It was 3.5% times what it was for wood. And so, what was supposed to be a quick little chintzy, $600 bar, turned into a $3,200 bar. So you can see, and that's just the bar, that's one item within that brewery. We had to do plumbing and drainage and everything else. And, that went from 35,000 to 75,000 real quick. Yeah. I mean, that's just what happens.
So I guess when stuff like that happens, so you've got the brewery as, I suppose, your main focus, because that's your commercial kind of activities and that's the bread and butter and that's where your passion is, I think. But outside the brewery, what keeps you grounded? Is it family, hobbies, anything that
Yeah,
will
it's
set?
definitely my children, you know what I mean? Like they are, well, again, if you want to be cynical, it's like the same thing I said before, right? So I invested 15 years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars into these children, and I do even to this day. So my daughter now is 18 and she's in Tulane, which is a very prestigious university over in New Orleans. But again, not every kid is cut for New Orleans. So even if you had the brains and the smarts and the academia to get into Tulane, you got to know your kid, because if they're going to be tempted by the wares and all the things in New Orleans, that they'll drop out, get kicked out, or worse. And so, I know she can handle it, and she is currently handling it. My son, he's 16, and I've got him in one of the best schools on Long Island, in St. Anthony's, which is a private school around the block from where we live. And he's also doing very well. He's on the dean's list, on a roll, you know, um, what do you call
Nice.
honors classes and stuff like that. So, I'm not going to say everything is not without its challenges. That's a bold-faced lie. They're still kids, but at the end of the day, I'm confident in the job that I did, that my wife did, and that they're going to be okay. And if they slip and fall, God willing, I'm here. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems that you've been and you are a great dad. Just the fact that you were at home and took them to classes and cooked, and I think you spend a lot of quality time. So I assume you've got a strong bond, and that is like mutual, which is, I think, for every parent, that's a dream. It's like the best feeling in the
it
world.
is. It is. And you know what's so great? And I say this because I like to be transparent with people. So that's what we all strive for. That's what we want. That bond with the child, that you would say, well, that child can come to me with anything, right? And that's what we want. But you only want that because they haven't come to you with everything. So I always say, be careful what you ask for, because now that my daughter's away in college, again, she's fine, she's good, she's in one piece. But some of the stories that I'm hearing out of her, only because I'm her father, I'm sitting here like, chewing my lip and my cheek. I don't say anything over the phone. And she goes, "Gee, Dad, you're quiet. Is everything okay?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just processing, just processing." She's like, "You're not mad, are you?" And then there's your moment, right? If I say I'm mad, she's going to now trust me with a lot less. So if I say, "No, no, no, I'm fine," I'm just thinking I told her, I said, "I don't think you're giving me the appreciation of being on this end of the phone, because I, having grown, was on your end of the phone, making the phone calls, telling my dad all the stupid shit that I'm doing. So I know that perspective. But I never knew my father's perspective until now, that he
Yeah,
had to sit there and listen to it and take it and kind of, sit there scratching his head like, who is this person? You know what I
yeah,
mean? And
yeah.
again, nothing crazy, but it's just funny that way.
Yeah, parenting is challenging for sure. So, well, what's the names, by the way?
Sure. My daughter's name is Abriana, female version of Abraham. And my son's name is my name, Ralph. But he always loved being called Ralphie, so we call him Ralph.
Ralph. Okay. So, is Mandarino Italian?
It is, yeah. And boy, you could do a whole nother podcast about my background and history, because so I'm adopted, and so I was raised Italian. And my roots are really in Chile. I was born in Chile, so I'm 100% Chilean. But everyone will tell you, especially because I talk with my hands, they say, "Oh man, you reek of Italian," and that's how I was raised. You know what I mean?
So, out of interest, do you speak Italian and Spanish, or?
Spanish, I took 9 years, high school, college. Am I fluent? I could work my way around. Problem is, like, English, from the opposite perspective of an immigrant. So if you came and learned English, you would have to listen to English, dissect it, and then, translate it in your head. That's kind of what I do. So I'm not quick with it, but reading it, I could pretty much understand it by reading it. But again, then it takes me a minute to remember my verb conjugations and, everything else to get it in there. These days, it's almost like, why did I spend so many years trying to learn a language? I can just put in translator or AI and it'll just be done in 2 seconds. Because I have family in Chile that I reconnected with, and, I speak to them frequently, and so it's so easy just to hit the translate button. I don't have to sit there and use that part of my
It's a
brain.
bit of a cheat.
Yeah, a little bit.
Because I mean, AI is wonderful and it can automate processes and can make your life much easier and it can do lots of lovely things. But the human connection is that thing is special. And I guess if you use AI to just translate, you will understand. But I think the connection is not made when you speak the same language. But I guess maybe that's the way to go. You're gonna have like phones, not phones, glasses that already
Oh,
translate.
yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
I always just feel bad because it's my mother and my sisters, so they're sitting there typing to me, and I'm like, so I'm reading it, now I'm typing for like 2 minutes, you know what I mean? And I'm like, "They're not gonna wait 2 minutes, this is an instantaneous world." So here I write it in English, I hit the button, it sends it in Spanish, and I'm like, "Alright, cool, this way the conversation, the flow stays the same."
It's more natural. Yeah, cool, cool. Okay, so now let's move a little bit to industry. So I want to set the context and then take your take. So you make gluten-free beer that, according to the people that drink it, is not the sad option. It's actually real beer, which is great. So you bring with grains like you mentioned, land. Do you do millet and buckwheat as well?
Yep, that's
Yeah.
correct. Millet and buckwheat, yep. Here's what we don't use wheat, rye, or barley, none of
All
those.
right. Because they basically wouldn't make it
Gluten-free, right.
gluten-free. Yeah. Okay. But now you've wrapped it around horror
Yes.
and posters, props, screenings, the whole vibe. So the quick question I have is, why build something that is specific instead of doing a normal brewery? And do you think that food and drink is going to go more towards the world of building around belonging and hobbies and topics? So you have more of a production rather than just beverage per se, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first. So when we were in my house making the beer, that's what we did. So we had a crappy dollar store shower curtain that we put up and a projector, cheap projector. I had a vinyl record player and we would listen to records and we would watch horror movies and we would make beer. Actually, that was a big part catalyst of our friendship was we bonded over horror movies. And at the time, we didn't have anyone in our lives that really gave a crap about horror. So it was like, it was kind of my wife tolerated it, but she didn't love it. And my one friend I used to go see movies with wound up moving 45 minutes out east, so I couldn't go see movies with her as frequently as I once did. My daughter liked it, but she was so little, I wasn't going to bring a 6-year-old to a rated R movie, though she probably could have handled it, so we bonded over that. So, of course, when we were brewing and I was talking about this business idea, it came up in conversation and I was just kind of like, we have a good time what we do. We will always have a good time. Sometimes it's not what you're doing, it's who you're doing it with. And so with that, I said, why don't we, this tap room, we could just make it like my basement or your buddy's basement or somebody's house. It's got to be inviting, but it's got to be professional. It's got to look, think about like the Hard Rock of horror. It's got to have memorabilia, it's got to have props, it's got to have posters, but it can't be a haunted house. And so it can't, nothing can jump out at you. So this way people feel welcome and because not everybody likes that. So there was this kind of happy medium of what it should be. So posters and props or memorabilia is basically the outfitting of the brewery. And it's so great that even my customers to this day will drop stuff off for me and be like, "Oh, I had this in my, storage unit or I had this in my closet for 30 years and it'd be better here, like at least here you'll put it up and I could see it every now and again rather than taking up room in my house." And I was like, "Oh shoot, that's cool." People would drop stuff off there, and that was kind of the reason for that. And then the other aspect of it was, I mean, it was basically there was a few reasons why we went with the horror. That was the first reason because we wanted it to be as authentic as possible to the experience that we had in our home. But then the other thing was so gluten-free beer, like I said, it doesn't exist, especially on the East Coast. So, from a business perspective, we did market research. So there's a small business development center. You can get them all over the United States. They're free to use. They're subsidized by the government. In New York, they have them. We signed up with it. We got a counselor. He did market research. But the problem was all the market research in the world wasn't going to give you an accurate picture. It's like throwing darts in the United States. So do you want to know what breweries will do in New York? Great. But there's no horror theme brewery and there's no gluten-free brewery. So what are you really looking at? You want to find out about gluten-free breweries? Fine. But the people over in Portland, Oregon are not the same income bracket and spend the same as the people in Manhattan and New York City. So what are you comparing at that point? Yeah, we can get numbers, but are they really accurate? So at which point it was, well, we're doing something completely different. And I think we need to further lean into the differences. So because it's not a traditional beer, we're not using traditional grains. We're not going to have a traditional tap room. And the other aspect of it was at the time, there was over 500 breweries in the state of New York, just
Wow.
New York alone, 500. And there was over 55 breweries at the time, just on Long Island alone, which is only 2 counties, Nassau and Suffolk. That doesn't include what you may visualize as New York City. New York City is the 5 boroughs. That's Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, all these things. That's not that. This is literally just Nassau, which is something like this, and then Suffolk, which is something like this. And so my premise is, why are you the consumer? Why are you going to come to me? Well, if you're not gluten-free, then you don't care. You're not going to come. If you're a craft beer enthusiast, you're going to be curious as all hell as what this beer tastes like, or if it tastes like beer, or what this beverage is, what's the process. Your brain will get tickled when we start going into the deep divulging of making the beer. But will that last? Are those people long-standing customers? Will they be back? Not if they're beer traditionalists. Traditionally speaking, beer is defined even by law, and especially in Germany. If you don't have wheat in your beer, it's not beer. Just isn't. So the horror, of course, again, piggybacks off of that. What's my clientele? What do we want? Well, you want to be somewhat niche in the sense of every business has to have a differentiator. So, okay, fine. So for us, the gluten part is the differentiator, but without any hard proven numbers that gluten-free people will show up in mass or at all, I cannot justify spending $675,000 on a project on a hope and a prayer. So I couldn't bank on the gluten-free aspect. So I needed to have something else. Okay, so you have the craft beer aspect. But again, how many of those people are going to be loyalists? They'll come, they'll try it, so you'll get your money up front. But then what happens? So then the last thing was, well, if we had a theme, then people will come, because even again, now you're just going to get curiosity people. I have people to this day that come in. I see them once a year, and it's during Halloween, because they consider it a Halloween theme, not a horror theme, a Halloween theme brewery, which is
Mm,
ironic because it's not like I have statues up of stuff. You know what I mean? Like literally it's masks on the wall. I have a machete from Friday the 13th, like little props and memorabilia. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original one that played Christy Swanson in the movie, she signed an actual wooden vampire stake that I
wow.
watched her whittle by hand at a convention. So these are the little things you can find there. So it's like, I don't know what's so Halloween about it, but that's okay too. So they come in this time of year, it fits their need for what they want. And so I know my Q4 from September to December is solid, because this is the time of the year that I bank on. But that's the point, right? So if I was just a regular brewery, I'm just riding the highs and lows of normal seasonality, which I still have to do, because the town
Yeah.
that I'm living in is so centrally located on the island that once you get to certain times of the year, people no longer even come to the town. So they want the shore, the water. So we're in the center of the island. If they're on the North Shore going south, now they're passing through us. If they're on the South Shore going north, because we're an island, you can get it either way, but the beaches are vastly different here, that they will now pass us again. If you're out east, you can't get out of New York without going west. JFK, LaGuardia. We have one small airport in the East End, but it doesn't do, international flights. So
Uh-huh.
if you're going anywhere of merit, now you got to pass us to go to JFK. And then subsequently, if you've heard of the Hamptons or Montauk or, this, the Gold Coast that, we're known for. Okay, great. So now you're coming from the city and you have to pass us to get to the destination out east. But notice, you've now passed us in every single circumstance that I've referenced. At no
Yeah.
point did you stop. because now we're no longer the destination. We're on the way to somewhere else. And
Mhm.
that's okay too. That's the part of the year that you just got to eat it. And I'm not the only one. There are restaurants and bars. In fact, there's 27 restaurant and bars on our block. But hey, so we all suffer during that time together. But I'm okay because I'm still flush from the fall generally. So that's why. And then the spring is tough because it's very cold and very rainy. The winter is tough if it's a lot of snow. People don't want to go out. So the weather affects us as much as anything else. And I don't have a back outdoor patio or outside space or anything like that. So we're limited in that way. Because if we did, the better weather, we would be flush too, because I get calls left and right. You don't have a patio, do you? I was like, "Oh, no, I'm sorry." They say, "All right, thank you." They ain't coming.
And will it be feasible for you, I guess, to change venue, to make it use
So
of also?
inevitably that's on the table, you know what I mean? Like, so for the third year, I was going over some of the numbers, and it's funny, I went to school for business, business management and marketing. I kind of dabbled into, but it was just, I'm looking at these numbers, and it's so funny because, when you're doing case studies in school, generally they give you not easy case studies, but things that are deliberate. So it's like, if the business is going up, then it's going up. If the business is going down, it's going down. It's year after year. You're not getting little peaks and valleys. It's more and then so if it's stagnant, then it's stagnant. We don't, there's only 3 years. So even that makes it challenging to forecast, what's next, because you've got your first years, your grand opening year. So whatever happens then you really can't count on, because there's got to be some sort of, I say equilibrium, but it's more like it's got to come back to earth from all the hype of the new place and everything like that. And then year two generally is a sophomore jinx. But in our instance, we went up 21% from year one into year two, which was good. And now, because again, we just completed year three today, I won't know exactly where we are until the end of December. I'm roughly $47,000 behind with 2 months to go. But I will tell you this, it has happened before. So I'm not, within those 3 years, this is my months. So with Halloween being on a Friday night, pretty sure that that's going to kick up a good amount of money. And then we do a lot of things for the holidays. I basically have an event almost every night, which is
Okay.
something that, we really came up with, in this area. That was another differentiator. So from year one to year two, I used to do one event a week. So 4 events a month. And then I was seeing all the money that these events were bringing in. And I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. I want one of these every day. And then it was trying to figure out a way to make it where that would happen every day. And does it happen? No. But there are bigger events, and then there are smaller events in the microcosms. And so that's where at least we give people an option. One of the big posts for social media that we do is our calendar every month. So yesterday, ironically, we just posted the calendar for November. And so with that, we get good traction, good play. 200-300 people before I even boost it. If I boost it, will like the calendar. 24 people will share the calendar. It gets good play. People look forward to it every month. It's like a drop. The calendar is a drop. We're always wondering what you're thinking. The customers will come in and they'll be like, we can't wait to see what's on the calendar. And I'm like, really? Like it doesn't, I'm like, well, what about the beer? You know what I mean? Like, isn't the beer, kind of what we're here for? But, it morphed into something else. And it's ironic because now, I don't want to say my competition, because I'm in a league of my own, but the other breweries and even restaurants, for God's sakes, even Chick-fil-A over here started to do events more frequently. I was shocked. I'm not saying that, they're all copying me, but I am saying that they slowly came to the realization now, because I've been doing the level of intensity on the events has been over a year and a half now. And now some businesses are starting to open up to the idea that got to be, what's going to drive people in here? We got to figure out ways to get them in, because they're not going to spend their money for the same pasta dish or the same cheeseburger or the same, beer every single week. There's got to be something else that brings them in. And that's, to your other point, community.
Yeah.
So community has been a big differentiator for us. I mean, that to me was, from my understanding, the premise of craft beer was community. So, Long Island is a different beast. We're all very busy, hustle and bustle. I don't know. I'd only gone to a few craft breweries. Everyone has their subset of regulars and stuff like that, but I didn't really see a growing, thriving community in my experience. But again, I wasn't a big brewery guy. I couldn't drink it. By the time breweries were really hot, I was already screwed from drinking beer. So why would I go if I'm just going to sit there basically?
Yeah.
So I can't say with all certainty, but as I said, I didn't see anything that was really overtly community. You know what I mean? So for my brewery, they feel like they were always the misfits and the outcasts. And, it's ironic because when I was in school, I had my ups and downs with popularity. I, could have went from, somebody who was very popular in middle school into high school to just, bottom of the barrel. Nobody would look to, talk to me or whatever else. So I get that aspect of it. And so I do things now for those people, for my people, so we have like a prom every year. We do a goth prom, for those people that, they weren't comfortable. They didn't get asked, they just, it's something that sticks with them. I don't want to say a trauma, but something that they regret. It's a regret. It's a missed opportunity. It's something that they always wondered, what would it have been like?
Yeah.
And so I throw our own. I get a DJ in there. We have a whole balloon arch. We have the king, prom queen sashes with the scepters and the crowns, and people take their photo ops and everything else. And, it builds trust. It builds, I understand my people and what they want. And, that I'm there, with them in it. And that's why I work as many hours as I do sometimes. Could be easy to hire people and to bring people in, but when people see you there all day, every day, you now become, you are the face of the brewery. The brewery is you. It's synonymous. It's the same. And so therefore, I'm proud of what I built, and I'm proud of the people that come in there, and I'm lucky to know them.
That's awesome. That's all. Yeah, because I think if you've got a product that just tries to sell on this on merit without community, I can see more and more brands marrying together, either if it's a topic or hobby or common interest, to then create that environment where people can feel one and enjoy the brand. And I think you are ahead of your time by thinking about the team and bringing people together. And I think that's great.
Thank you.
So, one question I'd like to know now, in terms of what's happening around the necromantic beer, in terms of flavors or particular lines, which beer is flying, at the moment? Which one is your most popular?
So what I love to tell people is, within the first year, we had 58 different beers and everything else. And you know what I mean? Like, we were just consistently rotating everything that we could rotate. Like, when we opened prior to COVID, I had 21 recipes that we were good with to open. But then what we were doing originally was syrups and honeys and sorghum, liquid sorghum, and it was a different product. The flavor was the same, but the mouthfeel wasn't there. The lacing on the glass wasn't there. If you're a wine drinker, you'd say it didn't have any legs. You know, it didn't have a lot of head retention. So you pour it out, it's nice and foamy, but 10 seconds later, it almost would look flat. So this, of course, was the way of the world. But I said, if we just opened with these recipes, we can eventually convert them while we were open, but give people hey, look at what we have. This is a product. It's delicious. Drink it. But then it never worked out that way. So when COVID happened, for us, it was almost a blessing in the sense of, so there was an indefinite amount of time because there was no end to this, lockdown or when people were going back to work or whatever. It wasn't like they said, oh, it's going to be, 6 months. You have 6 months to get your stuff together. So we started to work during COVID, transforming these recipes into all grain recipes. And so that's when, all these things came to light. So I took 18 of the first 21 recipes, and within one season, released most of them because we have 10 taps. So 10 taps, we're trying to get all these taps rolling. So the pumpkin beers are very popular. I have 5 or 6 pumpkin beers that I do. I think the Pumpkinomicon is probably the top seller for pumpkin. We have a blonde ale, Atomic. Everybody loves Atomic. I've got a lager that I do. People don't love it as much as the Atomic. I love the lager more than the Atomic. But hey, whatever. People have their own tastes. And then for Cinco de Mayo, I have a margarita sour that I do with a fresh agave. And then we do a Mexican lager. And people love that one. The Mexican lager, everybody loves. Got some habanero in that. Doesn't really have like heat. Well, it has heat, but it doesn't have the spice. So it doesn't really, it doesn't,
Mild.
yeah, it doesn't burn you. So people love that every year. And of course, I think my staple, the one thing that I'm known for, the coup de grace, would be Santa's Bloody Sash, which is coming up in the wintertime. It is a 12.5% powerhouse of a mock barley wine because again, no barley. So it's buckwheat, but we use, man, 100 pounds of cherries in this thing. It's spiced, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. It is Christmas in your mouth and in your nose. And then, it's 12.5%. That thing will wreck you. I've had people at this point, if you hear tales of the Texas barbecue challenge where you get like a 76-ounce sirloin, and if you can eat it, then you don't pay for it. These people, they're like, oh, I can have a few of these. They're having one, they're having two, they're having three, they're having four, they're having five. And I'm like, listen, man, I like money, but I like keeping you alive better. And so, you got to cool it. And the fifth one, people always, that's if they have a good tolerance, that's when, not that they collapse, but
Yeah.
believe me, they'll, kind of the eyes will dilate, the slurring will happen. All of a sudden, you'll see it. It's almost immediate. It's
Yeah,
kind of,
you can see the difference. That's interesting. So because you kind of brewing without barley, what do you use to get the body and the flavor? Is there
that's
anything?
my secret.
Okay, okay. Cool. That's cool. That's cool. So, if you were to describe the tap room in one line, well, what's the vibe? So people, if they're listening and they want to come and explore.
Yeah, one line is I would say authentically vintage, welcomingly authentically vintage, I guess. You know what I mean? Where it's just, we have some new stuff in there too, but most of it is heavy on the 80s props and posters, and because that was my wheelhouse. I try and keep it as authentic as possible, and that's really the vibe, is the authenticity, honestly, in one word. People come in there, hell, people come in there just to hang out with me, you know what I mean? And because if you're a fan of the horror movies, I can chew your ear off, or, we can have some friendly banter. If you're a celiac, I can relate to you and tell you my tales of woe and what I've done to this point for myself to get myself in a healthier, spot. Or if you're a craft beer enthusiast, I can go and drawl on about, all the science involved in what we do and how we do it. And so that's why I said those three subsects, that it was almost like a three-prong attack, I call it, between the craft beer enthusiast, the gluten-free person, and the hearth-loving human, that, one of those three has to show up. And when they do, then it's easy, because like I said, when I'm there, I don't have to put on an act. I don't have to put on a show. I'm just myself talking about my hobbies and my dreams and my family. And, I get to learn about these different people and welcoming them in the door, even if it's once a year, well, they'll say, oh, I don't know if you remember me. And I'm like, listen, it's my job to remember. Like, I don't have too much to do in the sense of mental capacity around here. Recognizing people and making them feel welcome is definitely, that's something.
So you will say it's welcoming, authentic, and vintage.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So this is all the good stuff. So I hope I don't bring a downer into the conversation, but coming to the friction points.
Sure.
So I guess you mentioned not having outdoor space being, I guess, a friction point in terms of capacity. Is there anything else that is being painful, like licensing or compliance or?
Initially, you know what I mean? Like, I'm fortunate, like we do, like one thing I always want to do is, and this is, to me, it just makes sense, but I've spoken to other business owners and they think I'm crazy. But, just I want everything to be so good behind the scenes, because like when my inspectors come in from, I don't deal with the health department because we don't serve food. So I'm agricultural here, which is wholesale and manufacturing. So when the agricultural market comes in, I'm always so thankful. It means a lot to me, but I know it means a lot to them because it makes their life easier. But they say to me, you're the third stop, the fifth stop, you're the 50th brewery. It doesn't matter, whatever the number that they come up with at that moment, that we are the cleanest, organized, easiest inspection, because we just try and be transparent and make it easy. I'm not hiding things behind a wall of kegs, like, and I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just saying it's like, that's, my inspections go abnormally easy because I make it so.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of friction, is there any bottlenecks you have at the moment you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, always. It's how do you get more people in the tap room? We're not doing distribution. We're very, very minimally staffed in this place. So how do you get the name out? How do you get your beer, sought after? How do you become more of global brand, in the sense of, let's say, outside of our little realm? I don't mean global like, Irish are demanding my beer in Ireland, I mean, more so, in the entirety of the state of New York. How will people find out about us? How will people come to us? If you're not a fan of horror, if you're not gluten free, if you're not a craft beer enthusiast, how do you get the average person in there who just wants a place to sit and have a date? Or, someone who's like, oh, well, I'm just going to have a quick meeting, or something like that. So that's, the challenge. And then, of course, if I were to do distribution, my site currently is not really outfitted for that. So we do the canning by hand. It's like a half automatic machine. So there's a lot of labor involved in that. And again, the margins are not so great because of the size that we're dealing with. So I'm not getting the discounts that I probably could or should with the grain manufacturer or with the canning people. And then of course things happen, tariffs and taxes and changes, and then all of a sudden now that's gone up exponentially. Navigating our price point, which should inherently be more because everything that I do costs more. The base grain is $1 to $2 more per pound before I do anything, and that doesn't include the $1,000 it costs to ship it because none of it is made in my state. I have to get it from Iowa or Colorado. So, keeping costs down while increasing traffic and maximizing the tap room while also keeping that tap room stocked is the balance that I'm trying to achieve, which that equilibrium is yet to be solved. How often and frequent should we brew, before things start going? And they have a great shelf life, don't get me wrong. But if you're going into a slower season, do you really have to brew that much? But then if I do, I can put it in cans and then promote the cans. So, but then I could cut the hours in the tap room. But if you cut the hours in the tap room, how does the average person know that? If they're used to coming at a certain time at a certain place, now you're changing that. It's like, there's a lot. And then, of course, the rising cost of electricity. God almighty, am I paying for it in electricity? So we had a hot summer and keeping it cold, I was paying $2,000 a month on electricity. I mean, you got to be kidding me. My
How
place only,
much?
yeah, my place only fits 60 people.
Wow.
So, what are we doing? But look, it is what it is. You know what I mean? So you do what you got to do. And then everybody hounds me for money. You know, I play music. Oh my God, arrest me. I play music. So I've got all these music licensing companies coming after me for money because we play music. Okay, great. So that's another couple of $1,000s I have to piss away because I have to pay for the licensing to play music. I already play the licensing for the films. So that's why early on we didn't even play music because I was like, fuck this. I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars just to play something that you can hear on the radio for free. And I get the premise. Everybody's got to get paid royalties and everything else. I'm not poo-pooing that. I'm just saying go after the brewery that's got a capacity of 250 people, not the guy that's got a capacity of 60 people, but you need your $650 annually from me. That's going to make or break the bank. Okay, that's what it is. It's what it is. Rent, of course, is sky high always. And yeah, so it makes for a very interesting. That's why I love painting the pretty picture. But and then, of course, the physicality of it all. I make a beer that's, let's see, it's 1,200 pounds I lift in a day. So it's 325 pounds. I got to take it off the shelf in 50-pound bags. Then I got to pick it up from the ground, hold it on my shoulder, put it in a mill as it mills. Then that mill goes where? Back on the ground in a tub. Then I got to pick up that milled grain with the tub, hold it, hoist it, and pour it into the fucking machine. And then it doesn't dissolve. So after you're done brewing, then what happens? Then you got to take it out of the machine and throw it away. So yeah, by the time you're done, I've lifted it about 4 times, 325 times 4. There you go.
That's quite a physical job. So I guess there is quite a few things that are a little bit of not necessarily bottlenecks, but it's not necessarily make your operation more fluid, which is like the marketing, I suppose. Also looking how you can best manage like production versus consumption, making sure that you understand the cyclical nature of it. Certain things are more difficult to account for, like electricity. You have to pay electricity. Licenses, if you don't pay licenses, then you cannot. So it's quite difficult to manage for those. But things like maybe traffic to the site and marketing awareness, all that stuff, I think can be worked around. There are things that can be done. I mean, that actually brings me an idea that if you don't mind, I can talk to you a little bit more about it at the end of the podcast. And that kind of brings me to the marketing sides of things, because I guess like your calendar seems quite popular and people are after that. So how do people actually find you at the moment?
So Instagram, Facebook, we're on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter too much, or X rather. Yeah, I mean, I've early on, I first of all, I didn't want to be the face of this business. That was my first thing. I was like, I want the people to be the face of the business because nobody's going to give a shit about me, but people will give a shit about themselves, right? So it's like when you're dating or you're trying to make friends with somebody, you let that person talk about themselves. It's flattering that they'll listen, you'll listen, they'll talk, and then you create this bond because they're talking about themselves and they realize how great that they are. And that's just human connection. That's psychology. That's nature, right? So I want people to see themselves on the Instagram. I want people to see themselves on Facebook. I want people to, tell their friends, oh shit, look at this great photo of me at this event that I was at, that type of stuff. And so by doing it that way, it's like unleashing the power of your people. Let them be the face of the business. They're the brand. But ultimately the world kind of changed a little bit. And so now everybody has to have a personal brand. Everybody has to have a story. Everybody has to do interviews. Everybody has to do all these other things. And it's like, and I'm okay with that. I think you can kind of gauge. I don't mind talking. I don't mind explaining. I love the transparency. Like I said, I like being honest and real with people. And it seems like that is a connection that I get with my audience, but not everybody is that comfortable. So for some entrepreneurs or, faces of the company, it's a little bit more challenging. For me, I embrace that side. I just didn't want it to be me. I just wanted it to speak for itself. I wanted for the people to be my brand representation, which they are, but everybody wants to see the man behind the mask, so I can't blame people for that. So here I am, because
Uh,
for the first 2 years, I don't want to say I hid under a rock, but I was working 110 hours a week.
wow.
So it was like, at what point am I going to be able to do something fun like this for, however long it may be? I got to get to work. I got to throw out grains. I've got to brew. I got to heat water. I got to do, cleaning cycles, because the whole process is very intensive. If I make a beer, it's anywhere between 8 and 16 hours, depending
Wow.
upon if it gets stuck or if there's issues. When I'm cleaning, it's anywhere between 6 to 8 hours. I'm using acids and caustics and sanitizers. I'm heating, water to 140 degrees, 168 degrees. So just the heating of the water takes time, because it's like sometimes you're in your house and you're boiling pasta and you're like, man, is this going to get done or what? Here you're at, I'm at 30
Exactly.
gallons or 120 gallons. You can imagine how long that takes. So yeah.
So out of interest, do you have a team working with you? Is that a big team
I have a
or?
few people. No, I have some people that help me out behind the bar. I have an assistant brewer. That's really more of like a part timer. But some days, if I need him, he'll be there full time hours. So it all depends. Again, time of the year and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And in terms of the marketing, the Facebook and Instagram, do you have someone helping you with that? Or is it?
Thankfully, my wife is, that's kind of her day job. She works for a local nonprofit. And so, that's kind of where she cut her teeth. She was a graphic artist by trade. And then now she does their social media. She's, I think, their communications manager at this point. And so, I'm fortunate that she'll help me out with stuff like that. She'll show up with a very nice camera, take really good photos of events. Like I said, if you get a chance to the Instagram, you can see the post from 2 days ago, the 3rd-year anniversary that we did. Very, very nice photos, and we had a packed house. So again, that has to be shown. People need to know, hey, this place is alive. It's lively. People are coming here. On the days, and it does happen on the days where, we're dead or quiet or something like that. And then like I said, there's 27 bars and restaurants all around me. People will walk by the storefront and then they look inside and nobody's in there and they're like, well, forget that. I'm not going in there. Because if this was any place worth visiting, people would be in there. I'm not going to walk in there. But then on the days that we're packed, I get stragglers that do that and walk in and they're like, I have to be in this place. What's going on? What is this place?
Yeah, yeah.
But then that brings in more energy because they're feeling the energy. And so it's infectious, it's contagious. And I like that too. So,
I
but
understand. So in terms of your channels at the moment, which one do you think is the most popular? Bringing in
definitely the Instagram for,
Instagram, yeah.
I think it's, Facebook to a degree for sure, but I think different age brackets use different types of social media. So I think I'm 41, about to be 42 in 2 weeks. And, I think that my generation, plus or minus, would be Instagram. But once you get a little bit older than that, you're on Facebook kind of thing. So yeah, that's why those two are super important. We were always discussing, oh, we should have a website. We should do this. We should that. A website's a great idea in theory, you know what I mean? But of course, it's a standard. It's a placeholder. Everybody has a website. You got to have one. But, they're not cheap. Like I used to have people draw up proposals and everything else. And I was looking at $3,000 to $4,000 for something that I just, outside of a calendar, maybe, on-site sales, some sort of e-commerce,
Yeah.
and then like a landing page. I don't understand where $4,000 would come from, other than you think that I'm some sort of successful business and you just want to gouge me some cash. So, I went to school originally before I changed to business was coding. So I didn't stick with it. The code changed. I used to do C++ and Visual Basic. Now forget it. That's so archaic. So it was just like, at this point, I don't know that, but I do know that it's not, thousands of dollars to do. So I think I've gotten it down, I think somewhere between 1,200 or something like that. But again, for a small business where I'm paying $2,000 for electricity, how do I justify $1,200 on a website? Challenging. So I say, we're getting traction, like I just pulled up the numbers just for the sake of from the last couple of years. So from year 1 to year 2, the industry as a whole, craft beer was down 1%. That's what it was. But that was our grand opening year. Okay. So we were all right? We didn't establish our baseline. Year 2, from year 1 to year 2, now craft beer has gone down 4%. We went up 21% in sales from year 1 to year 2.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're not done with year 3. So as I say, I'm down roughly, but again, this is my time to shine. So if I can, and I think I will, I'm going to put it out there in the universe. If we get even means that we maintained that 21% growth.
Even despite the fact that the trend is going down.
Not just that, but we don't even know what the trend will be because those numbers have yet to be released themselves. So what from that 1 to 4, now when I woke up just this 1 week ago to the day, last Tuesday, all over my phone, because Google gives you, the news of the day, guess what the top headline was for beer? I don't know if you heard this.
No.
Coors Light laid off 400 people. Incredible. Mass layoffs in an industry that had been protected from depressions, recessions, downswings, its entirety. In the history of alcohol, it's never gone down this way because they used to say the end of the world would be discussed in a bar because back in the day, that was the communal space besides church and the bar. And you're not going to talk politics at church. You never did. So that's what it was. You go to the local pub, you sit, you talk, and then you figure out life. That's how it was. Now, with social media, you don't have to do anything. You have to leave your house. Hell, I don't even have to go to the refrigerator. I can just DoorDash something. I'll DoorDash it, Uber Eats it, whatever you want to call it, get it delivered. Now I don't even have to go to the local store.
Yeah, that definitely trends that are changing, and that's why I think food and beverage. That's why I asked at the beginning because I was curious. You have to transcend what you're selling by creating that state of belonging and community, because that will bring the people together where they identify each other within the group, but also use the brand as a way to communicate. Because if you just sell something for the sake of its own value, it's very difficult to then reach the audiences that are out there. And with the trends and shifts in terms of people spending more time at home and watching Netflix, it changed the whole landscape. And I guess with the introduction of more technology, it's going to even carry on changing. So it's quite interesting the years ahead. But if you've got such a niche product and a community, you've got some value there, which you can then bank on it, which is
Exactly.
something, yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to start wrapping up because we've been on the call and you've been so kind. But I just was talking about in terms of barriers and kind of things that are stopping you progressing. If you could automate anything at the moment, other than probably the production, is there anything else that you think on the back office maybe you would like to automate?
Yeah, definitely on the back end stuff, but never on the front end, because I'll be honest, there is automation on the front end. There's a company that is in existence now that it's your own name, it's your own whatever, but it's automatic taps. So the tap would be, the wall would have taps, markers, plates, whatever. And then you'd have to go to a machine or a person to show your ID, and you get like a token or a card, and then a cup. And then you hit the button or the token in there, and then it'll automatically pour you. So you don't need a bartender, basically.
Right.
Now that takes a big hit out of the communal aspect of it. So unless you're going there with people, it makes that one-on-one interaction very
Yeah.
difficult. So a lot of my customers are single females, believe it or not. And so when they're in there, I go out of my way to make sure they're comfortable, because the one thing that women are generally not in any environment is comfortable. And that's not a slight. It's just that, there's always somebody hovering over them, or, wanting the attention or whatever. So it's like, to make sure that they're good. And sometimes good means just leaving them the hell alone, but just checking in so they know that that they're there, that they're not forgotten about, and that they're okay, and so I do that. And even if a single guy comes in, I do the same thing. I want them to be comfortable. They have to be comfortable, because if they have that good experience alone, when they have their own people with them, they can only imagine how that would be amplified. And that was
Yeah.
what you said before. Everything that you said, I call experience. And then
Yeah.
so the experience has to be comfort, welcoming, appreciation. Everybody leaves. I say the same thing to everybody. I really appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out, spending some time, watching some movies, great conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your weekend, whatever it may be. And 90% of the people say, oh, we'll be back. Whether they come back or not, that's up for debate. But, the point is, in that moment, I gave them the best experience that I could give them, and they appreciated that, and they reciprocate in kind. That's what that is hard to replace. So I don't think I can automate that. But
No.
back end stuff, QuickBooks, things of that nature, sure. Especially now with AI, certain things you can just start plugging into there. I don't know that I would take legal advice from AI, but other things you can certainly throw in there that would help. Give me extra time in my day.
Yeah. Is there anything else that comes to mind, or you haven't quite delved into it at the moment?
Well, for marketing, marketing's another thing where, I can sit here and try, and I like to write. I love writing, but, am I going to sit there and come up with the proper words and everything else? I mean, I could, sure, or I can tell AI, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is the group that I'm trying to market to. If you're familiar with the TV show Mad Men. So
Yeah.
I tell it, I said, you're my Donald Draper. Make this shit sing. Get these people in here. And it does. And then if I don't like it, then I say, no, tighten it up. You know what I mean? Like, and then I talk to the AI so it gets an idea for my tone, my verbiage. It learns from me in the sense of, if you read the social media, or if I spoke to you in person, you'd be like, oh, I could see where that would come from. So it doesn't reek of artificial
Yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah. Cool, cool. I guess I had more questions to add, but we had a wonderful conversation, and I want to be grateful for your time. But there's one question I always like to ask at the end, because from what you tell me, in terms of the time you spend and the physicality of it and the persistence that you had to go through COVID and make sure that everything is thinking along, what keeps you passionate?
Well, I like money. I know that seems so funny and trivial and whatever, basic.
It's a
But, I also don't like losing. So it's, if let's say I said, well, and I say this every year, I do. I tell all my regulars, my favorite people, and sometimes the people that walk in here, I said, this is it. This is the last year. I can't keep doing it. My body, who knows how long my body can keep doing it. I actually go see a wellness doctor for an hour every week, and he does acupuncture, hot cupping, chiropractic work, and then a detox. And he literally puts me back together every single week. And I pay through the nose, but I'm happy to do it, because I wouldn't be able to function as a human. So that's kind of my point from a physical perspective. How much longer can I maintain this? And I've always said from the beginning, if the brand is me and I am the brand, what value is the business? Because if you take me out of the equation, is this business going to sink or swim? So that's neither here nor there. But the truth is, the motivation for me is the people. I say it all the time. I made great connections, friendships, just interesting people that I've met along the way, the stories, but giving somebody something. So I came into this business, and I'd say this story. I came into this business on the premise that I was going to be an investor. I was using family money. My dad backed me up on this thing. And so he's a partner, my old partner, Jesse, before he exited. he was going to be the engineering guy, the guy that did all the mathematics behind the brewing, and so I can come up with the flavors and the recipes, and he can do the dominations of numbers and things of that nature. Like you said before, the mouthfeel, the head retention, all that stuff. These are the things that he would be responsible for, I would be responsible for, my father would be responsible for. And so with all that, I was making, going out and speaking to the people, so to speak. So I would have 4 people behind the bar at one time. It was, my partner, his wife, my wife, and myself, and we would work, incessantly. And so when I was talking to people, imagine this, I sought money. I sought doing something different, a business opportunity that arose in a market that was untested and really raw. And so I didn't know what to expect, except all these people would be super grateful and give me money, honestly. And that's really what it was. But why I bring it up, I have had grown men taller than me, I'm 5'11 and a half, lift me up in a bear hug over their head. I've had women kiss me on the lips. I have had, and I'm not talking about anything other than just gratitude.
Yeah.
And I've had grown adults weeping and crying in my tap room because I gave them a sense of belonging, safety, and a community, even if they were themselves bringing the community. So if you're celiac, there is very few places on Long Island, none, but very few places where everything is gluten-free, top to bottom, soup to nuts. And so that's what it was. The experience for the gluten-free person was you and I, Cris, if we go out, you can pick the place. I'm sure I can have a salad or grilled chicken or something, and you're going to get whatever you're going to get. Are we going to have the same meal? Unlikely. If you get the grilled chicken, maybe there's a marinade that has gluten in it. You can have the marinade. I can't have the marinade. So guess what? You're going to have the marinade, and I'm not going to have the marinade. Point is, we don't have the same experience. We're going to enjoy our time out. We're going to have a good conversation. It's going to be a great time. But the experience is not shared. It's not a shared experience. So for somebody who can no longer have shared experiences with people, everything that comes in my brewery that I'm selling, let it be popcorn, chips, sodas, beer, whatever it is that I'm offering, it's the product, one way only. So now we can share the experience together. So I'm not having a version of it. We're having the same thing. And I think that's what people look for, is the connection. And
Yeah.
so again, that was something I wasn't bargaining for. And it was incredibly emotional at first because I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think about that aspect of it. I didn't know how much it would mean to the people that really appreciated it. And so having said that, that's pretty much, something that I do look forward to, is not the gratitude, but just watching somebody's face light up, knowing that they're comfortable. I had a group in on Saturday, 6 people, and I thanked them. They were leaving. And the one girlfriend, she goes, well, we've got our token celiac, which is her boyfriend. And I smiled and I laughed because, again, they brought in 4 other people to spend the day with them. And for that 4 hours that they were there, that guy had a normal day, a normal experience where for 4 hours he can shut that part of his brain off. Because as a celiac, you can't do that. Anywhere I go, anything I do, I have to ask questions. That's just the way it goes. Because one little thing is going to set me on a whole dark path. So for that, I am eternally grateful that I was, I didn't think I was going to change lives making beer. I thought I was going to be slinging drinks behind the bar. But seeing that changed my perspective. It changed me as a person. I'll be honest with you. Talk to my wife, talk to my kids. They'll tell you, it changed me as a person, seeing the reaction, the visceral reaction up close.
That's very interesting. So I guess that brings us to the end of this podcast. So I guess your journey was one through friendship, meeting someone with an interest in horror. Then, because of your own condition of being a celiac, took you to gluten-free beer. But then you realized that there was more than just producing beer and making money, but bringing a place where people felt that it was authentic, welcoming, and the vintage aspect of it brought people together. And having someone enjoying a moment with friends without having to worry about their health and having something in common brings the community aspect of it and the warmth of the place that then transcends the drink. And then because you also do community events, things like having, get not the name, the prom.
Trivia, we got the prom, we got
Yeah,
drag
the
queen
prom.
bingo,
I think
paint
I think
problems.
that's such a great thing. So, for people that are listening and they want to know more about your brand and what your mission is, what socials would you like to share with them so that
Sure.
they can follow you?
So Instagram, it's at Necromantic Brew Co. It's all one word. You know, you can search it right on Facebook too, is Necromantic Brew Co. That's Necromantic Brew Co. And yeah, you can find us on social media. You can just Google us. We'll pop up all over the place. I promise.
Perfect. So that was an awesome conversation. Thanks for pulling a chair at the operator's table. And for you listening out there, if you enjoyed today's episode, follow us wherever you listen on podcasts and share it with someone who loves hearing real stories from real operators. Today's guest was Ralph Mandarino, founder of Necromantic Brew Co. I'm Cris Morgado. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the next table.